Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland is currently in a closed-door meeting in Washington with top trade officials from the U.S. and Mexico. The hastily arranged trip follows months of wrangling between Democrats and the Trump administration. The CBC's Katie Simpson is in Washington, staked right outside those talks. She joins us now. Hi, Katie. What's the latest?
Well, Chrystia Freeland got an unusual greeting from her American counterpart, U.S. Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer. I should set the scene here. He doesn't like the media. He doesn't do a lot of things on camera. But today, as Chrystia Freeland arrived here in her new role as Deputy Prime Minister, not only did he come outside in front of the cameras to greet her, but he greeted her enthusiastically with, I think, a three-cheek kind of kiss thing going on. That has never happened in front of the cameras before. And if we're going to read into things, because that's what we do as reporters, that would be a sign that both appear to be in a pretty good mood. Chrystia Freeland decided to come down here to Washington after some very intense meetings this morning between all three countries. The Americans have presented some new additions they'd like to put onto NAFTA that have to do with enforcing Mexican labor standards. The Democrats, as you mentioned, had been negotiating with the Trump administration to make those tweaks, to make those changes, and things went so well this morning that Chrystia Freeland, they felt it necessary for Chrystia Freeland to get down here, get to the negotiating table. And so this is really a make or break moment when it comes to getting things done in this political sort of season right now. Two big things are happening in the United States, and NAFTA could sort of get lost by the wayside. One is the potential impeachment of the president. Two is the 2020 election cycle. So there is a sense of urgency here. They want to get this ratification process started, and this meeting could be one of the determining factors in whether all three countries are comfortable with some of these new compromises and are ready to move forward, and the Americans are ready to move forward with the NAFTA ratification process.
Some of the compromises, Katie, that you're referencing obviously come from the Democrats. They were very much focused on Mexico and particularly the protection or enforcement of labor standards in that country. What are the Mexicans saying today that you've heard?
Well, we heard from the lead Mexican who's dealing with these negotiations, and he seemed quite comfortable with what he'd been presented. He said he had to go over some documents. He spoke to reporters when talks broke today at noon. And he said that, you know, if he'd been losing sleep at night, what he saw, he's not losing sleep anymore. He says there's been progress on all fronts. Have a listen.
What is now being considered towards a convergence, towards solution, is not going too far. It's going in the right direction, and it certainly will be, when we come to an agreement, it certainly will be a huge improvement on the originally signed agreement, thanks to the Democrats. So I cannot say anything wrong about that.
And so what are you watching for going forward, Katie?
Well, we're hoping that the Deputy Prime Minister will come out here and say a few words when this meeting is over to get a better sense of where things stand. There are a couple of options. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving in the United States, and basically all of D.C. has been shut down since about noon today. And a lot of the people who work down here are kind of upset that they're having to spend their Thanksgiving Eve standing. Oh, is she coming out soon? Okay, so Vashi, guess what? Cat-like state of readiness. Chrystia Freeland is going to be coming out shortly. I'm going to get out of the way because she's going to speak at that microphone right there if she does stop in front of the cameras. So I'll send it back to you guys, and then when she shows up, why don't we take it live?
We will join you in that cat-like state of readiness, and we will head right back there. I'm actually sitting with the power panel, so we will discuss what's going on with NAFTA until Minister Freeland comes out, and we'll cut right over there as soon as that happens, and we'll bring it to you guys live who are watching. Amanda, I'm going to start with you. This seems to be a good sign, right?
I would say yes. I mean, I think everything from the warm embrace that she received to the optimism that seems to be coming from everybody involved. It feels like ratification is within reach. To Katie's point, and while it may seem small, the fact that Thanksgiving is tomorrow may be a reason why, you know, people are trying to push to get this done as quickly as possible today. And I'm not saying that in jest. I actually think that, you know, the reason that she's been hastily sent out there was certainly not so that they could have long, encumbered discussions. It's because everybody believes that they're close to a deal. And these are, you know, the changes, the desired changes from the Democrats are changes that Canada would support, those increased labor standards that were certainly part of Canada's position and Canada's considerations as well. So these are all good news items for Canada, and certainly Canada isn't in any way you know, they're not a barrier in signing this agreement.
I'm going to cut you off because the minister is emerging from the USTR right now. We're going to head over the live and listen in.
So good evening. It is great to be back here in Washington. We have just had a good trilateral meeting hosted by Ambassador Lighthizer and also with Ambassador Siede of Mexico. We are glad to be here, to be working with our American and Mexican colleagues to get the new NAFTA across the finish line. We were also pleased to host Chairman Richard Neal, and a congressional delegation earlier this month in Ottawa, and we're glad to discuss some of these issues with them. And I would just like to conclude by thanking, in particular, all of our American counterparts for working so hard. We're here, it's already 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving, so they are really hard at work. We appreciate the work that they are doing to get NAFTA across the finish line, and we are here to do our bit. Thank you very much. Happy to answer your questions.
Is Canada willing to change the rules that were proposed by the Democrats with respect to labor? Is Canada willing to accept those proposals?
As I think you will all remember from our days of negotiating the agreement, Canada does not believe in negotiating in public. What I will say is Canada believes in this agreement. We have a strong interest in having this deal ratified in all three countries, and we're very supportive of the efforts being made by Ambassador Lighthizer, of the efforts being made by Speaker Pelosi and Chairman Neal, and we were here to work to support all of those efforts and to support, of course, the work being done by our Mexican counterparts.
Minister, at this stage, do you see this as something that you guys are close to within hours? Are you going to be down here for days? What is your plan right now?
You will remember, Katie, that I have always thought that it was unwise to make predictions around time. These negotiations always take as long as they take. Today, from the Canadian perspective, was a good meeting. Good work is being done. That's why we came here to meet with Ambassador Lighthizer and Ambassador Siede in person to support all the efforts being made. I will say that Canada absolutely believes that getting this agreement ratified in all three countries would be a positive step for Canada, for the United States, for Mexico. It would be positive for our entire continent and for the prosperity of the people of Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And we are here to do the work needed to get there.
But are you going to stay down here? Is enough progress being made here to have this go into Thanksgiving on Thursday? Are you going to go to Bob Lighthizer's house for dinner and keep talking about this and what's going on?
I think that Ambassador Lighthizer deserves to spend Thanksgiving with his family, and I am really personally grateful to Ambassador Lighthizer. His family is here visiting him. He doesn't get that much time with his grandchildren, so I'm really grateful to the hard work they're doing right now on the eve of Thanksgiving. I do also want to underscore for people that while, the visible part of this negotiating process is when we come here and meet in person or when we meet in person in other cities, a huge amount of work is being done over the telephone. A huge amount of work is being done at officials level. This week alone, I have spoken to Ambassador Lighthizer at least half a dozen times. I spoke to him on Sunday, I spoke to him on Monday, I spoke to him many times today, I spoke to him yesterday, and we have actually been in very close contact really throughout the summer and fall, throughout the writ period. We've been in close contact also with the Democrats. Chairman Neal remembers that I took a break from knocking on doors in my riding of University Rosedale to talk to him on the phone. So we have been very closely engaged in this process. We've been talking a lot also with our Mexican counterparts, and that is just work that needs to continue. We really believe that it will be good for all of our countries to get this deal done.
Is there another meeting planned at this point, or are you going to be?
Have Democrats put anything on the table that you think is unreasonable or taken things too far?
Again, from our perspective, every country has a domestic ratification process, and we respect the integrity of each country's domestic ratification process, very much including the U.S. domestic ratification process. We have had good conversations with Chairman Neal and his delegation when they came to visit us. We had a good meeting with Speaker Pelosi and a broader team she brought together when we came here in June. And obviously, our negotiating counterpart is Ambassador Lighthizer in USTR, and we're in close touch with him. What I will say that I have observed is a high degree of respect on both sides in the U.S. We have heard from the Democrats of their respect for Ambassador Lighthizer and the diligent way he has been pursuing this. And we've heard from Ambassador Lighthizer equally respect for the Democrats and how hard they're working on this.
When is the next meeting?
Will you still be meeting with Seade on Friday?
We very much look forward to continuing the conversation with Mexico. People are asking about next steps in terms of meetings.
Right.
That's something that we're working on. And I am not in a position right now to tell you precisely what the agenda of next meetings will be. But all three of us have just committed to each other that we are going to continue working hard, talking, whether it is on the phone or in person, very intensely over the next few days.
You can clarify something. When the deal in principle was signed, you said you weren't willing to renegotiate or reopen NAFTA after the agreement in principle was signed. Are you changing that, or are you willing to open it up again?
Canada has done its job in negotiating the agreement. Having said that, we very much believe that getting this agreement ratified in all three countries will be good for all three countries. We respect that the U.S. has its own domestic ratification process, and that is work they have to do inside the U.S. Where we can be a supportive partner, we are very happy to do that, and that's why we're here. Okay,
So
thank you very much.
It's a side letter, basically, that you're working on.
If you're just joining us now, that was Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. She emerged from a meeting with her U.S. and Mexican counterparts in Washington about an hour after entering the building. She was just outside the USTR there in D.C. There was no formal announcement of the deal getting ratified or being at the point at which it can be ratified. That is the new NAFTA that we're referring to here, the USMCA. However, Minister Freeland did talk about the idea that it is getting closer to crossing the finish line. And on that last question there, and I'd like to pick up with this in a second with the power panel, she also she didn't say no to the idea, at least, that perhaps Canada would be willing to renegotiate certain aspects of it. We know, for example, that the Democrats have been pushing for stronger enforcement to Mexican labor standards as part of all of this. So no firm word on exactly where this goes from here, or if it is at the finish line, or it just sounds like it is a lot closer to the finish line maybe than it was 24 hours ago. Let's bring the power panel back in to discuss what we just heard from Minister Freeland, Danielle Turp, Amanda Alvaro, Tim Powers, Kathleen Monk, and Chris Hall. Kathleen, I'll start with you. That last answer kind of stuck out to us, I think, because we heard the question in which the way it had been framed prior by the Canadian government was like, we've done it, the deal's done, here you go. There is a bit of a willingness, it seems, to be able to support whatever has to happen in order to get this deal ratified.
Yeah, because we know that the Democrats have been pushing, being egged on by other labor organizations in the states, AFL-CIO, pushed on to get these labor conditions improved and some kind of monitoring happen. And we should expect any progressive government across the world, frankly, to actually support these changes, particularly on labor. We know that there are things like that were introduced into this agreement, like the $16 average wage, but it's not a $16 minimum wage. So we have to look at these things. We know that over the life cycle of the previous NAFTA agreement that jobs had, I just lost my pen, jobs were lost to Mexico. We want to prevent that now. That's still happening in plants in Windsor as is recently. But what it comes down to is both the Democrats want this deal done because they want to be able to go into the 2020 election cycle saying, look, we got these wins for labor and we're going to stop and cauterize, the bleeding of jobs to Mexico. But also Trump wants it done. He said he wanted to get it done by Christmas.
Well, and the Prime Minister certainly has the domestic setting for more amendments to a deal if it does, in fact, focus on labor. I mean, you have to say, yes, the agreement is open. Why the hell is she in Washington otherwise?
Exactly.
Why is she talking to Bob Lighthizer at her count 6
Totally.
times? I mean, there's change at play. And this is not a bad setup for the Liberals as they come back to Parliament on the 5th of December to say, hey, look, we kept working and now we've got to win. And look at our potential partners, NDP and Bloc. Labor, of course we're opening it up for Labor. Wouldn't you do the same thing? So this has the potential to be a winning proposition for them as they return to the House.
Danielle, what do you think?
Well, if you're looking back in time, it's a remake of what happened with NAFTA. It's Jean Chrétien who asked for side agreements on issues of labor, on environment, and even on water. And it's the Democrats that are doing that this time around. So Canada cannot complain that this is happening because Democrats have the same kind of concern the Liberals had several years ago. But I have to say something that I find fundamentally flawed about how it's done in Canada. You see, in the United States, parliamentarians are involved. The Democrats are involved. Nancy Pelosi is involved. And here, nothing. No parliamentarians involved. The Conservatives are obviously not involved. There's an important democratic deficit in Canada when it comes to negotiating treaties and then implementing, and Parliament has no real say. So maybe the deal will be done, but in Canada it will not have been done the way it will have been done in the United States, with much more, open debate in Parliament about these very fundamental issues that we'll find in these new side agreements soon.
Although they will have to, Chris, vote on ratification here in Parliament.
Yes.
But I take your point. There's less back and forth.
Two really good points here. The agreement may be better as a result of the fact that Democrats were allowed to have an engagement and were withholding any kind of support for the deal as it was currently constructed. Second thing, I don't think anybody's happier and more excited about the prospect of getting this off the table than Chrystia Freeland, who has, after all, a new job, dealing with the provinces who might prove just to be as intransigent as the Americans and the Mexicans have been in these talks. But to Danielle's point, we haven't seen a lot of the detail. I don't know if they have to reopen the deal technically, or they can have a side letter. If it's simply money changing hands, we don't really know the details yet. But clearly, if I read this right, and I'm pretty pessimistic about these talks, as you know, from having talked about it as much as we have, this looks like, for me, the first time where we might be actually in reach of a deadline and be able to get this thing done.
No real dates, though, provided by the minister, Amanda. She was asked very specifically about next meetings, next steps, and she said she didn't really have an answer, but that there would be some more calls and that there was a willingness, at least on the part of everyone involved, to keep the ball rolling. I'm paraphrasing, but
yeah, I think she was pretty clear that there was interest from all parties to get it done as close as possible. She used terms like, we're close to the finish line. She was pressed about the idea of when will the next meeting be, and I think she said all of us have committed to calls and meetings if necessary over the next few days. So it feels imminent. It feels like it's around the corner, and this is better than just setting up a good news story for the minority Liberals as Tim was suggesting. This is like a trophy on the mantle. This is what they want heading back into, as Parliament resumes. December 5th, it would be really nice to be walking back in with a deal to be ratified. This is exactly the kind of story that they're looking for heading into the holidays. So
who wants to deliver a turkey before Thanksgiving?
Nero was better. Come on, lift your game here, Hall.
I can't handle this. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your time tonight. Thanks to our power panel, Amanda Alvaro, Tim Powers, Kathleen Monk, Danielle Turp, and Chris Hall. For months, the trade pact has been on ice while U.S. Democrats push for changes. So 1 year after the deal was signed, are we now nearing the final hurdle of ratification? Eric Miller is president at Rideau Potomac Strategy Group. Mr. Miller also currently serves on the External Advisory Committee on International Trade Policy to Canada's Deputy Minister of International Trade, and he joins me from Washington. Hi, Mr. Miller. Great to see you again.
Good evening. Thanks for having me on.
What is your read on the significance of this meeting tonight, the fact that we have all three parties at the table again in Washington?
So we're nearing the home stretch, and really what's left on the table are issues that don't have a lot to do with Canada, with the exception of a little bit on pharmaceuticals. But this is fundamentally about labor and environmental enforcement. and ensuring that progressive, labor-friendly members of the Democratic caucus are supportive of what is agreed to, and also the big U.S. labor unions, and at the same time meeting the objectives that Ambassador Lighthizer and the Trump administration are advancing.
Can you delve into those asks from the Democrats a little bit more? We've heard the terms fairly loosely spoken of, the idea of, for example, stronger enforcement of labor standards in Mexico. What exactly are the Democrats looking for, and what do you anticipate the administration is willing to comply with?
So there have been labor provisions related to trade agreements for some time, but the Democrats' concerns are basically that they're not really enforced to the degree that they need to be enforced. And so picking up on an idea that's been used for customs audits, they're suggesting that U.S. authorities could go into facilities in Mexico unannounced and review whether the labor standards are actually being complied with. And so this is something that Mexico is not particularly keen about, but this is where the Democrats' position is going. On the environmental front, similarly, there's the same ability to assess without much advance warning what is happening in terms of practice, and to have mechanisms to see trade benefits lost if there's not compliance on those two fronts with respect to labor and the environment.
You mentioned it's not a hard sell to Canada. How hard of a sell is it to Mexico?
It's a pretty hard sell to Mexico. Mexico has national sovereignty concerns. It also has certain competitiveness concerns, because naturally speaking, they're worried that the U.S. may want to use this to take away trade advantages for other purposes. And so I've been to many factories in Mexico, and by and large, the conditions are pretty good. But there are always ways to find facilities that are not operating the way they necessarily should, and you get those in the U.S. and in Canada at times. And so if those are the triggers to see the U.S. take away trade preferences from Mexico, that has Mexico very worried. So they're trying to put guardrails around this to the greatest extent possible to ensure that abuses can trigger responses, but one-offs are not something that will lead to major disproportionate responses from their perspective.
The Deputy Prime Minister of this country, in that scrum when she was talking to reporters, mentioned she'd spoken with Ambassador Lighthizer 6 or so times over the past week. Is this a period of renegotiation? Are they talking about, do you anticipate they're talking about side letters? Like, what is the mechanism to address the changes the Democrats want to see? Does it require reopening the deal?
So what you see smartly is that Canada has not put the deal before Parliament. And so Canada will put what looks like the final text to Parliament when it is finalized. The Mexicans have ratified the agreement, so they would have to go back and pass a group of amendments. And so it is relatively simple to put these integrally into the core of the agreement, because the agreement as signed is merely an agreement in principle. And what matters is what is the package that is formally transmitted from the U.S. Trade Representative's office to the Hill. And of course, there has been this long negotiation between the Democrats and Ambassador Lighthizer, but similarly, USTR has also been keeping Canada and Mexico closely informed, as have the Democrats, to ensure that they are not doing things that would pose radical problems for Canada.
So say in the coming days there is agreement between all three countries on whatever changes may come. What are the next steps for the deal for ratification in your country?
So, well, as a Canadian, you can certainly know the process will be it'll go before committee, Parliament, and vote. In the U.S., it will be a formal transmission from the U.S. Trade Representative's office to Speaker Pelosi's people on the Hill. The House Ways and Means Committee will review it, the Senate will review it, and it will be passed under what's called Trade Promotion Authority legislation, which means that it will not be changed. It will be voted on up or down. And what Speaker Pelosi is trying to do is to ensure that she gets a big group of Democrats to vote in favor.
And can you explain to us, I guess, the political context of that? Because from our vantage point, we see obviously Congress consumed by everything going on with impeachment, and Democrats who seem not to want to, for a variety of reasons, hand the president a win. Is this a win for both sides if it's ratified?
Yes, absolutely. Speaker Pelosi has taken a very hard line in the negotiations, and there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, labor is a very important constituency for the Democrats, and they want to ensure that they're not unduly alienating them. Secondly, Speaker Pelosi is trying to manage a very fractured caucus. As you see the primary campaigns in the Democratic Party, you see those who declare themselves to be outright socialists and those that are traditional Democratic centrists in the Bill Clinton mold, all trying to navigate this process. And so she has to find a way to try to ensure that the various constituencies in her caucus are satisfied with what is happening in the agreement and then be able to push it forward. So we've known for some time that if you count it up from a strict vote count perspective, that there are enough who would vote in favor to pass the agreement. But it's not about getting the bare 218 votes minimum in the House of Representatives. What this is about is ensuring that you're well over the majority to ensure that not only it passed easily, but that each of the constituencies within the Democratic Party are satisfied.
So based on what you've heard and seen over the past hours and days, how likely do you think that is?
I think we are very close. If this agreement is signed, which I anticipate it will be in the coming days, I would put the odds of ratification at upwards of 90%. Because the impeachment process is going on very much as a sideshow. It has its established players like Adam Schiff and so on. But Congress is a big place, and there are others that are trying to do things. And so, while the impeachment process rolls on, the administration and the House Democrats have decided that USMCA is a priority on which they want to work together. So they are doing so, and they will succeed.
All right, lots for us to watch for. Thanks very much, Mr. Miller. I appreciate your insights this evening.
Thanks for having me on.
Eric Miller, president at Rideau Potomac Strategy Group. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.